welcome everyone. This is always an interesting one to do because it has a couple of elements that are pretty volatile and changing, including the new Microsoft announcement. We'll go through that as part of what we're going to talk about here today. So sometimes people wonder why they would come to a webinar from a company they maybe haven't heard that much about before. We always just like to kind of establish our credentials. We've actually been in this business a long time, longer unified messaging, longer than anyone else. And along the way, we've had a lot of good experience with enterprise customers and the complexity of their environments. So we feel pretty comfortable talking about this particular scenario where big business is involved. And, you know, big business is complicated, no matter what the area you're in. The infrastructure piece, the personnel piece, it's not an easy thing to do a turn on a dime. So you like lots and lots of time, lots of notice. And this is a case where you got a little notice and you're getting a little more now. Microsoft's changing their announcement. But still, it's something that has a deadline out there that has caused a lot of people to have to scramble. And we're pretty comfortable with how that goes. And we can talk to you about what we've done in this area already. We're very well established in doing exactly the kind of solutions that you're going to have to be looking at here. Our platform does far more than what we're going to talk about today. Obviously, we make these webinars very focused and short to the point because that's what people want. They're looking for one particular kind of information, and we like to give that to them. But we also like to let everybody know that there's a lot of other things going on our platform. So if down the road you end up looking at our platform for one function, we just hope you'll remember to come back and look maybe at our website or talk to one of our vendors and see all the other things that we can do within the enterprise to streamline your business. So today we're going to talk about the Exchange Online Unified Messaging deadline. This has been going on now for a little over a year. And while a year seems like a long time in some cases, a year to fund, plan, and implement a major infrastructure change for an enterprise, that's not really that long. So last year, about this time, Microsoft came out and informed their customers that there was a style of doing business, an architecture they were currently supporting for which they would be discontinuing support. And this involved people using their legacy PBXs at their enterprise, but using Office 365 Exchange for their voicemail. And the way this was done was by pointing some sort of trunk or gateway from the PBX across the internet into the Microsoft site through a session border controller that they were maintaining, and then that border controller actually created direct connections into the user's Exchange server. And their announcement said, we will be turning this off. And they gave a little less than a year's notice, and that year has basically come and gone. And fortunately, we're going to see they extended that. They've now extended it out till April 30th of 2019. So you have almost another year there, which is very good because surprisingly, even right towards the deadline now, we still have customers making early inquiries into what they need to do. So I don't think the word really got out there quite as well as Microsoft thought it would. And as a result, they've been kind enough to extend that deadline. This announcement is different than the other announcement in that the other announcement talked about 4 options you could have. This one only talks about 3. So what they've done in this one is basically removed for support from one of the other options they were encouraging people to use. And we'll look at those options here coming up next. So the whole challenge here really is fairly simple. If you're a customer using Exchange Online or if you are a customer that wants to keep their legacy PBX but wants to move to Office 365 and store your voice messages in Office 365, then you now have to make some choices. You don't have the choice you had before of using the direct connection through the gateway. So we're going to look at what the other options are and sort of how you can proceed from here. So here, this is the description of the customers that would have the problem. They would have an on-premise PBX, and when phone calls rang to a user and forwarded, or calls that would have to go to an automated attendant menu, would, let's say, go through a SIP media gateway of some type, through a border controller, firewall, internet, and into the Microsoft-provided SBC. That SBC is no longer available as of next July. So this is the option that won't work. The other way to do this was some PBX vendors had engineered a direct SIP trunk that didn't need a gateway They could go through the same basic connection across the internet and into Microsoft, but it still went through the online SBC, and that session border controller is what's going to become unavailable. So if you're using one of these two architectures today, or you were planning on using one of these architectures when you moved to Office 365, the bad news is you can't do that. So now you have to come up with something different. So originally, Microsoft said, we'll give you 4 options. Option 1, just get off your legacy PBX and use a Microsoft in the cloud PBX. And at the time, that was the cloud PBX. And the cloud PBX wasn't really ready for prime time. It was really missing a lot of critical things. So they weren't very successful at getting people to do that. Option 2 was go ahead and use our on-premise PBX, the Skype for Business Enterprise Server. And people could use that, and that would become their phone system. And they allowed that system to connect up to the in the cloud for Exchange Online if you wanted to use Office 365. But that, for somebody that was actually not using Skype, was a very expensive and complex migration. The licensing for the full Skype license and deploying it all, very expensive, major change, and it would have been difficult for people to do that within a year. But some customers undoubtedly headed down that path. Option 3 seemed very attractive to some customers because basically they said, just put part of a Skype server on site and use one of the supported gateways, and those gateways and Skype together will allow to continue to connect and to go up online and connect to Office 365. And the upside of that was it was the least expensive thing to do. Still kind of expensive because you had to deploy part of Skype and you had to license Skype for all the users. But still, the least disruption in terms of to the client, because nothing at all changed for the user. They would use that same clients they were using, their voicemails would look exactly the same, function exactly the same. And then option 4, they said, just don't use any of our PBX components and find another way to do voicemail. Implement a third-party voicemail system. And they made that sound as unattractive as they could, but it actually turns out that's a pretty good option. And we're going to look at that option in some detail. About 8 weeks ago, the announcement that they had on their blog now said, no, we're not going to support option 3. And then 2 days later, they took that off and there was no announcement on what they would support at all until just last week when they came out with their new suggestions. And their new suggestions basically say, we're not going to support option 3. If you went down the path for option 3, you'll still have to change that come next July. So sorry about that, but we've decided we really aren't going to do that. Now that's an interesting statement for Microsoft to do that, and it probably implies other things Microsoft is going to announce in the near future. We're not big on trying to double guess Microsoft, but I would expect you'll find some announcements in the future that explain why they wouldn't support that particular version. So now what they say is you have a choice between 3 solutions: the Office in the cloud, which is now, they talk about the cloud PBX and about Teams, which is the replacement for the cloud PBX, and cloud voicemail. They talk about the full migration to Skype on site, and they talk about the third-party voicemail system. Again, not really making that look like a very good option. However, that is a pretty good option, because what we found over the years is even with Office 365, having a product like ours, a third-party product, store messages, voice messages, in the user's inbox works perfectly well. Microsoft has developed a great set of APIs. We mostly use the EWS, the Exchange Web Services API today, although we're migrating a good part of that to their new Graph API, just to stay current. But we have the ability, basically, to give them unified messaging, still using Office 365, still using the Outlook client or whatever client they're using, and to have very similar functionality, very little change to the user. And we'll talk about how we're going to do that in the next couple of slides. So one of the things about unified messaging that it's good to know is we're sort of the leader. We've been doing it longer than anyone else by years. The CXE product has been storing messages in Office 365 for almost 10 years, since right after it came out. So if you think about, of all the options, ours is the one that's happened already more than anything else. We have dozens and dozens of customers who are storing their messages up there that way. So this is not a new solution that we had to come up with. This is just us tapping you on the shoulder to let you know, by the way, this is a solution you could consider, and it's something we have a lot of experience in. So what we're going to do is a little bit different. The AVST option basically, and I always wonder why we did this slide backwards because it's a little confusing. Now the PBX is on the left-hand side. Now when a call goes to a phone and it's busy and has to forward to voicemail, or a call comes in to go to the automated attendant, or any of the other advanced applications that CXE runs, those are sent out, and typically over SIP trunk, to the CXE server. That server is local. It's within your enterprise. It answers that call. It records that message. It runs all the applications. When the caller is done, if a message was left, the CXE uses those same graph and EWS APIs and pushes just the message across the data channel through the internet and into the Office 365 server. And as I said, this is something we've been doing close to 10 years. We've done hundreds of these customers, and it's basically the same technology you would use to store a message in an enterprise Exchange server, with just a little bit of difference in terms of some of the protocols used. So this is what our option is. It isn't move to a third-party voicemail and not have your messages in Outlook anymore. It's basically have the same functionality you had before, and we're just doing it a little different. And there's some advantages to the way we do it. So if you look at the way you'd be doing it today, or if you're using one of the third-party gateways, if you moved to those recently, what happens is the phone call is moved across the network. So the call comes in, goes through, let's say, the audio codes gateway, goes through on-site firewall and various pieces of equipment, goes across the internet, goes into the Skype for Business server that's on site and connects. So when the call is happening, you're tying up bandwidth across that entire channel. So there's both a latency and a bandwidth issue there to have to move the phone calls. You're talking 64K channels times the number of active calls you'd have to have going on. But perhaps more importantly, if there's a disruption in that data channel, so something goes wrong in the internet and the connection and the whatever you have going on, now those phone calls that would normally go to voicemail go ring no answer. So your automated attendant doesn't work, messaging doesn't work. You basically have customers that are hearing ringing until they get frustrated and hang up. And that's the downside of cloud. The upside is the consolidation and centralization. The downside is the total reliance on the data network. It's different with our implementation. With our implementation, when the calls come in, we answer the calls, we do all the work on the CXE system that's at your premises, and then if there's a message taken, we just move the message. It's not real time, we're just going to move the message over, store it in the user's inbox. So far less bandwidth use, much less concern about latency, and if that channel goes down, basically the messages still get taken. We record those new messages, we save them in the user's inbox, they can call in over the phone and log in and get those messages. They can't get them obviously from their Exchange client since we can't get to Exchange, but those messages are still available. And from the caller's point of view, everything is working 100%. So it not only is a great replacement in terms of comparing it to the other choices you have, but it is also more reliable than any of the other methods used. So we're pretty happy when we talk to customers that, laying this out, and the reception for this has been very, very good. The thing about our product is we've been offering unified messaging for longer than anyone else by far. In fact, you can go out to many of the industry expert reports, and they'll tell you we're the undisputed king in both unified messaging and interoperability, our ability to connect to anything. And we'll give you choices in terms of where you store the messages. Yes, we certainly can put them into Office 365 in the cloud, but perhaps you have a legal group and they're nervous about having their messages stored in Exchange for retention or confidentiality issues. Well, for those users, we can keep those messages on the CXE platform and let the users access them with our secure clients. And we can make it so they can get to those messages, but they can't even get them out of the system. So very, very feature-rich in terms of how you deploy unified messaging. We also hook to any PBX out there, premise or cloud. By far, we're the leader in interoperability in that area. So if you look at kind of this choice as a safe choice, both for what you have today and what you might move to. Let's say you're going to move to a different PBX in a year. This solution moves to any PBX you're going to purchase. Maybe you are eventually going to move to Skype for Business. And if you do that, Enterprise Skype for Business, we're the only other system besides Exchange UM that can offer you the full functionality for voice messaging and call processing on an enterprise Skype system as well. A lot of choices there. So one of the things we worked with Microsoft when this first started happening on doing was using the Outlook forms that they are using today. So if you're using Office 365 and you're using Outlook, there's a form that's there. So when it recognizes a voicemail message, it displays that form that's a little different. And if you have this, you've seen it. It's the player bar and the bar that controls how you're playing messages, etc. And the way that's controlled is by marking that message with a unique message class. And Microsoft has worked with us in allowing us to use that same message class when we put the message into Office 365, which means the user will see the exact same form. It won't function 100% the same way. There's some changes in the architecture that they didn't expose to us and we couldn't take advantage of. But playing the messages over this PC speakers, forwarding the messages, all of that will be exactly the same. We also have our own form you can load instead, which is much more feature rich. It does everything as well as functions that the Microsoft form didn't do. So you'll have some choices there in terms of how you do it. No matter which form you use, all the telephone-based functions will come from our product. You'll be calling into our product, and that interface will be a little bit different. But we have basically all the same functionality. We have a DTMF interface. In fact, we have 9 DTMF interfaces, so we can emulate all the other traditional systems. We have a speech interface. It's by far more robust than what Microsoft offers. Our speech interface is 15 years old, so being in the market that long has really made that bulletproof and extremely intuitive interface. We have much better notification. We have all the features you're going to be looking for. So while there might be some small amount of disruption when you move from the system you have now to the CXE system, it'll be very much minimal, and the opportunity to deploy many, many more productivity enhancing solutions is going to be there for you. So today they're talking in terms of, they have a little bit of a confusing story. They pushed real hard to use Skype for Business Online and with what they called the Cloud PBX. And now they're talking about moving that to Teams. Neither one of those products is very robust yet. And I suspect there'll be no more development on Cloud PBX, and Teams will start getting some development. But if you look at Teams, I think you'll find it's really not ready to be an enterprise PBX yet. What they have done recently is confirm that they will continue to support and develop Skype for Business Online. And that was something they were kind of keeping quiet about for about a year. And it looks like they were hoping everybody would move to the online version. But the online version just didn't have what it needed. So Microsoft has reestablished their support for new versions going forward. And that's important to us because remember, we can also support that just like every other PBX. So if you're going to look at the premises version of Skype for Business as your telephone system, you really should look at our product. And we have a whole different webinar that we do talking about what we do that's better than just using the Exchange in terms of the piece on-premise. And as we look at kind of our ability to move into the enterprise, I've talked about Skype, but we also support everything else out there. So if you have this one site today that you have to do something with because you're using a gateway technology that's not going to be supported, keep in mind that all the other sites you have, whatever they're using, it'll be very easy once you put a CXE system in to consolidate down to a single system. Greatly lower your costs, simplify your maintenance, increase the productivity, make it so that everything works exactly the same at every site. There's a very strong consolidation story. And basically you start that by putting in that first CXE system. When Microsoft first started dabbling this back in the, but even before the OCS days, we realized that, that while they would be a competitor, they would always be somebody that we had to work with as well. It's such a popular enterprise piece of infrastructure that we needed to really get in there. So we worked really hard. In fact, we're kind of unique in that we're one of the few companies that has dual gold communications and messaging certification. So we have competency in both those because we talked about their PBX, Skype, and their message storage system Exchange, and we're certified to do that. And basically that lets us play across the board with Microsoft no matter what you're going to do. And it's always good to be able to go into somewhere and make sure you're compatible with one of the #1 products that's going to be found pretty much at every enterprise. So we had a program that we announced at the beginning of last year when they first announced this, because we knew enterprises had to get moving. We knew it was difficult to get funding, and stuff wasn't in the budget, obviously, because it was a surprise. And so we have a program that we put together. And that program would end shortly here, but we're going to extend it. I don't think we're going to extend it for another year, so it's something you probably want to look into, but it really does lower the cost to get into our solution if you're moving from an existing Exchange Online system to our system. We'll make it very, very easy financially to do it. Still, obviously, a lot of work to put that in place, but the financial piece is something that we can make a little more palatable. So, any questions?
All right, thanks very much, Neil. Okay, so there's a couple questions already in here, and I'll just let you know if you'd like to submit a question and you have not already, use the orange arrow in the upper corner to expand your menu options, and you should see the question box toward the bottom. Neil, first question, do you sell the solution direct or just through VARs?
We just sell it through VARs, and I don't think anyone's going to find that a problem, because almost all of the major VARs carry our product, because we fit into so many different environments. They almost all find it necessary to have that, and the chances are pretty good you're already doing business with someone that carries our product.
Okay, next, you mentioned Outlook forms. Are there other changes to the user?
Yeah, so there are going to be a few changes. The message is going to look a little bit different in Outlook Web Access. If you put it in using the Outlook form that you're already using that comes with Outlook, then that message class in Outlook Web Access will make that experience the same. But in the Outlook client itself, there's a few things you can't do. Some of the control settings that you normally set from there won't be available. You'll have to go to, we have a different, a little tool that gets installed on the user's desktop that can set that up. The telephone interface, when you're calling over the telephone, let's say you want to call in and change your greeting, that's going to be slightly different as well. It's very similar, but it is still a little bit different. So there will be some changes to the user. We're not in any way saying just, try and slip this in and they'll never notice, but it's actually fairly minimal, and you can get very, very close to exactly what you have today.
Okay, great. Next, in your opinion, I know you like the question already, right? In your opinion, does Microsoft expect more people to move to O365 Cloud PBX now that there's more time until the deadline?
I think the answer to that is yes, only because I think they believe it'll give them time to get the Teams product ready to replace the Cloud PBX. They haven't been completely clear, at least in anything I've seen, about what they're going to do with the Cloud PBX, but there's a lot of talk about what they're adding to Teams. So I think two things happened. One, I think they got close to the deadline here, and their customers were yelling at them because they didn't have enough time, and who really wants to turn off a major enterprise customer like that and have them hate you forever? Microsoft couldn't afford that. Secondly, their two options were kind of soft. Moving it up to the cloud was very soft. Their contradictory announcements about what the PBX in the cloud was going to be had confused everybody. So I think they felt they needed time to straighten that out. And they had backed away from the enterprise Skype piece, and I think they needed time to get an announcement out and get people comfortable again that that's a product going forward. So I think the delay is a combination of things. I don't think it's just they thought if people had more time, they'd go to it. I think it's if they had more time, they can maybe make it more palatable for people to go to it.
Okay, all right, next. Is the locally installed client a requirement?
No, you don't have to put a form or anything in there. What will happen if you don't put a form in there, we'll still put it in the email. And basically what will happen is when you open it up, it'll look like an email with a WAV file attachment. When you double click that attachment, whatever device is used on your PC for playing WAV files will play that sound file fine. It'll just be a little less friendly to the user. With the forms, either ours or Microsoft's, there'll be a player bar there that'll let you play the message, and you can change, the controls and the volume and things like that. So it's definitely not required, but it is more user friendly to have a form in place.
Okay, thanks, Neil. Okay, excellent. It looks like that wraps up the questions. There's no more in here, and at least for the moment. If anything pops in or you have a question after you disconnect, you can always send those to us at info@avst.com. We'll make sure to route those to the appropriate person. And we do also route the questions that we answered around internally just to make sure that we do the appropriate follow-up on those.
We just always like to thank everybody, and we know it's hard to take time out of your day. We try and keep these short and relevant, and hopefully we do. And that info@avst.com is where you should let us know how we're doing, what else you'd like to see us do, etc. So thanks, everybody.
To learn more about AVST, please visit www.avst.com.